It feels like most years at least, when it comes to the NFL draft, after draft weekend comes to a close and people start talking about their way too early draft grades and their draft winners and losers, most years the Ravens always seem to be in the top 3 to 5 mix. Most everybody loves what they did. Most everybody looks at them and says they did a phenomenal bang job, which, you know what, isn't true every year. No team nails the draft perfectly every year, because if the Ravens did, they would have like 7 or 8 Super Bowls now. Just saying, they would. They wouldn't have 2 in their history. They'd have like 7 or 8. They would have been the preeminent dynasty of the past decade or to 15 years in the league. But they are pretty good at the draft exercise. They're also really good at just kind of allowing the draft board to fall to them. They're really good at, continuing to replenish talent as talent prices themselves out of a roster spot with the Ravens. But now that their situation has finally gotten resolved with Lamar Jackson, they've got the long-term contract extension work out, it was time to get to work when it came to the draft. And I think if you asked most people before this draft started, they would have looked at this and said, Odell Beckham Jr. sighting be damned or not. The Ravens' top need heading into this draft is still wide receiver. Some might say corner. Okay, wide receiver, corner. Maybe those are your 2 biggest needs. But I think a lot of people would say, if you're going to give Lamar Jackson that much goddamn money to play quarterback, then you better give him more weapons to throw to outside of Mark Andrews and Rashad Bateman and a Odell Beckham Jr., whose last really, really good season was 2016. If you ask those same people, many likely would have said that Zay Flowers made sense for them. And maybe the question would be whether or not he would even be there. Others might have said, well, Jackson Smith-Njigba. But again, the question is he going to be there or not? But especially once JSN was off the board, it felt like, if he makes it there to the Ravens pick at 22, it'd be real surprising to see Zay Flowers go past that point. He's an electric slot option with quickness. He's got enough speed, great route runner. He was my wide receiver 1 in this draft class. I had a top 15 grade on Zay Flowers. I really liked this kid. I really, really did. And I'm not going to back off of the comparison of who did he remind me of as like a player, as a prospect. He reminds me of Antonio Brown. And I'm not going to back away from that. Doesn't mean he's going to become Antonio Brown. I'm saying that's what he reminded me of. But when you talk about the Ravens, this was a big need. But it was also an example of them of just letting the board kind of fall to them. And, they were in the middle of the wide receiver run, but certainly didn't initiate it, and they didn't reach to participate in it. And they got the guy that I felt was really best suited for them. So when I look at that, I thought Zay Flowers was really good value with where they got him at 22. I liked the approach of just letting the board fall to him. Didn't reach. I gave him a B for day 1. Now, when you shift to day 2 for the Ravens in this year's draft, it requires a look at the bigger picture, as it does with some other teams, right? You look at it and you say they traded their second-round pick for Roquan Smith, who finished last season as a first-team All-Pro. So for a second-round pick, they got a guy that came in for a little over half the season and ended up finishing as a first-team All-Pro that they then had to go give a lot of money to. But any team ultimately would say they would want, especially if you're in like a championship contending window, you would want a Roquan-type talent in round 2. So the Ravens just used that draft pick to get the actual Roquan-level talent. But even beyond that, I would say, how the hell does Trenton Simpson fall to 86? He was in the bottom, right in the middle of the bottom half of round 3, Trenton Simpson was. By contrast, the Detroit Lions took Jack Campbell at 18. Was Jack Campbell really 68 picks better as a talent in terms of value? And no. To me, Trenton Simpson was a borderline first-round pick talent. So this was a steal to me for the Ravens. How the hell did they get Simpson at this point in round 3? And you might say, well, what are they going to do with him and Roquan and freaking Patrick Queen? You figure it out later. You can't pass up on talent like this at this point. Like I said, I had a better grade on him than I did Campbell. I thought he had more upside. So for Campbell to go middle round 1 and for Trenton Simpson to go at the bottom portion of the middle of round 3 feels like a really great deal for the Ravens here. I gave him an A because when you look at it, they invested a second-round pick into a first-team All-Pro, and got a guy that was a borderline first-round talent at the middle part of round 3. That's really, really damn good work. That deserves an A. And then when you look at day 3, there are things to like about their strategy there as well. Tavius Robinson was one of my favorite kind of like round 3, 4 players. Really like his upside as an edge rusher. He feels like the perfect type of edge rusher for the prototype of what the Ravens like from that position. He's long, he's athletic, he's got really big upside. You know, the potential, if he reaches that upside, to vastly outplay his 4th-round draft position. You know, Q Blue Kelly can be a contributor. Thought, again, a good, solid value secondary player for late round 5. Aumavae-Laulu can be a swing tackle, and you never know what can happen there. But, you know, for a team like the Ravens, want to continue to reinforce the trenches, makes sense. But my favorite thing that they did on day 3 was say, we see Andrew Vorhees here. We know damn good and well he was somewhere between the 2nd to 4th round talent in this draft class before he tore the ACL. The Ravens are in a position to say, we can let him sit for 2023, redshirt him basically this year. And in 2024, we've got a guy that could potentially compete for a starting spot in the interior of the offensive line. So what they did, trading up, giving us up a 6th-round pick next year for a guy who, from a talent standpoint, depending on your perspective, was somewhere between the 2nd to 4th-round talent, is exactly how the fuck you should be doing this draft at this point. I was pissed that the Bears didn't do this with Vorhees. Hell yeah, I'll give up a 6th-round pick next year to gamble on this guy. I can afford to wait a year for the knee to heal up. This is about the long-term play, the long-term game here. This type of talent doesn't typically come available in round 7, and the Ravens were smart enough to pounce and other teams weren't. So for their day 3 grade, I look at Tavius Robinson, I think fits what they like in edge rushers, can see future starting potential for him in that system and that team. And trading up to get Vorhees in round 7 was a real steal. So I gave him a B- for day 3. I look at this draft and say, basically the first 2 days of this draft produced Zay Flowers, Roquan Smith, and Trenton Simpson. Not bad. Day 3 brought some high upside athletes with that potential big steal in the aforementioned Vorhees. You could look back at this in 3 years from now and say, why the hell did this guy have such a hard-on for Vorhees? He's never played. You can say about a lot of talents, right, when we talk about the draft, but projectable level of talent was much higher than the draft position he had. So Ravens felt like another year, the above-average draft performance. I gave him a B for this year's class. Excuse me. Because Simpson, I think, is going to be a starter at some point down the road. Zay Flowers, I think, has the potential to be their wide receiver 1 over Bateman, over OBJ. But 2024 and beyond, really be their wide receiver 1. Roquan is Roquan. And then you look and you say, okay, if guys like Robinson and Vorhees become starters, this is another really good Baltimore Ravens draft class.